There are three great epochs in church history. First, the short period of Jewish Christianity. Second, the period of European civilization. Third, the period of Christianity as a fully world religion, which has only just begun.
What exactly is happening to the Catholic Church? Until February 11th, 2013, conventional wisdom said that this 2,000-year-old institution, steeped as it is in tradition and protocol, was incapable of any real change. But what happens when conventional wisdom goes out the window?
I was sure that what I heard was wrong. I was sure that the initial reports were wrong, that there's been some mistake made, and popes don't resign.
Since the historic resignation and departure of Pope Benedict XVI, the Catholic Church has been on one continuous roller coaster ride that has excited many, troubled a few, and surprised everyone.
You can't neglect him. He's a newsmaker with great credibility, great transparency, honesty, and what the world's not used to seeing is humility.
At the center of it all, a serene and unassuming prelate from Argentina, extraordinary in his ordinariness and uncompromising in his message of tenderness, mercy, and joy. History is unfolding, and the question remains: what does all of this mean for an ancient community of faith and for the world it seeks to change for the good? Change was evident in this pontificate from the very beginning, and the more than 6,000 journalists at the Vatican for the transition ensured that all of it was caught on camera.
We don't really think he's not going to live in the papal apartment. We don't really think that he's going to pick up the phone and call and settle the bill.
I sometimes wonder in these past months, this past year of Francis, whether there's any buyer's remorse among the cardinals. Did they really know what they were getting into?
David Gibson is a journalist who covers the Vatican for Religion News Service. He says the cardinals couldn't have predicted the immediate positive response to electing Cardinal Bergoglio.
It's really hard to know what any bishop is like in his diocese. These are 115 men from all over the world. The College of Cardinals is depicted as this kind of super elite club, but in reality, they don't always know each other as well as we would think they would.
But this conclave was different. The cardinals met for 7 days of general congregation meetings before entering the Sistine Chapel to vote. In this case, profiling the next pope meant speaking candidly about what most saw as a dysfunctional Vatican bureaucracy. Leaks, scandals, and a self-referential attitude among its most powerful administrators had crippled the Vatican for years. Many speculated that it was this internal crisis that, in the end, broke Benedict's back.
Well, I think we were all pretty certain that there would be dramatic changes and a new way of looking at the Curia and more collegiality.
One of the cardinal electors was Sean O'Malley, the Archbishop of Boston. He confirms that, more than anything, this conclave was defined by its unique context.
It was a very unusual conclave in that there was no funeral, so we weren't mourning a pope. Because of that, I think there was so much speculation and talk about who the next pope was going to be and what were the qualities we were looking for.
Fewer than 24 hours from now, the College of Cardinals, made up of 115
conclave, the vote to choose the next pope, will begin on Tuesday. The Cardinals will
cut off from the outside world. Word is
Outside the Vatican, journalists scrambled to put together a short list of possible candidates. What no one saw coming, everyone now admits.
Cardinal Bergoglio did not come up on the radar screen.
Scott Pelley of CBS was shocked to hear Bergoglio's name ring out through St. Peter's Square, and like everyone else, he was amazed by what he saw next.
He walks out in that cassock. He walks out with that pectoral cross, and the first thing I thought was, that's not right. He's not wearing the right clothes. That cross isn't the right cross. As if the Pope was going to make a mistake about these things. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message. He was saying, I am a simple man, and I have values that I hold dear when it comes to relating to the poor, the disadvantaged, the misunderstood in the world. He said it all the moment he stepped out on that balcony.
I remember running down, literally running down to the square to be there, when the curtains opened and when Pope Francis came out onto the balcony.
Facciamo in silenzio questa preghiera de voi su di me.
To hear the silence descend upon a crowd of tens of thousands of people and to kind of feel the energy of that and the solemnity of that and the peace of that moment, especially juxtaposed to the kind of raucous celebration that was occurring just moments before. And so I think about it, it just talking about it takes you back to that moment, and there's really nothing like it.
What was most impressive about Pope Francis on that cold night of March 13th was the decisiveness of his words and actions. The huge responsibility thrust upon him by the cardinals didn't seem to change him at all. Interestingly, what the world saw as new for the papacy turned out to be classic Bergoglio, a simple, humble man trying his best to live the gospel, a man totally comfortable in his own skin. The first Latin American and Jesuit pope hit the ground running. His choice of name and aversion to papal pageantry were early signs of his priorities. Two weeks later, on Holy Thursday, it all began to sink in as Francis washed the feet of 12 young prisoners, including Muslims and women.
That was such a powerful and visual kind of image to put out there. It was a statement. It was a mission statement as much as anything.
Never before had a pope washed the feet of a woman during a Holy Thursday celebration. Vatican guidelines instruct bishops around the world to choose 12 men, as Jesus did, although exceptions have been made in some dioceses, including Buenos Aires. If Francis was making a statement, it came off loud and clear. Church rules and practices are less important than expressing love and care for another person, no matter who they are.
No one needed words to understand what was happening. It was the same what Jesus had done.
The day-to-day work of the Bishop of Rome has continued under Francis. Like his predecessors, he meets dignitaries, holds general audiences, and leads the Angelus prayer each Sunday. But unlike them, he made a radical decision early on, refusing the papal apartments and choosing instead to live in the Vatican guest house. This allowed him to stay connected to what was happening on the ground. From there, he began systematically inviting Vatican employees to celebrate Mass with him each morning.
Benedict XVI had a private daily Mass in the Apostolic Palace. Pope Francis has a daily Mass in the Casa Santa Marta, which is, to all intents and purposes, a hotel within Vatican City State.
That hotel is where Emmer McCarthy now goes regularly at 7 o'clock in the morning. She's part of the team at Vatican Radio that attends those Masses and translates the Pope's homilies into English.
The people who are present in the hotel can attend, but most importantly, these daily Masses were Francis's way of getting to know the people who work with him and for him at the Vatican. And I also think that there is a reason why it was decided to make these homilies public. He wants people to know what he has to say.
Her co-worker, Father Bernd Hagencourt, agrees. He runs the German language department at Vatican Radio. It's great that people are reading the Pope's homilies, he says. Just don't read too much into them.
Clearly see that there's a connection between him and the people in the room there. It's a very difficult connection to make to the rest of the world. So you have to be there to know what it's about.
Should we be telling the world then that this is not sort of theology or teaching of the Pope that should be necessarily applied?
It is a teaching of the Pope in the sense that he's giving a homily. Nothing more and nothing less. It's a homily. And he's celebrating Mass. It's not a pontifical thing. It's just a Mass, a weekday Mass. Very simple. No mitre, no staff, no people around him, just a simple Mass. And that's also what his thoughts, his words are like. It's something he wants to give to the people sitting in the room. This is why the people all over the world want to read about them, because they are not made for eternity, but they are made for today. And this works. Fantastic.
This is an Argentinian Pope who thinks not only in Spanish, but in Argentinian Spanish. So he translates these idiomatic sayings and expressions from his native Spanish Argentinian into Italian. And then we have to try and render them in an English that is comprehensible to everyone. One morning he was speaking about the fact that Christians need to have joy and we need to evangelize through being a people of joy. And he was warning against being, what he said in Italian was, Christians with facce di sottaceti, which basically means pickled faces. Now you can't write in English, Pope Francis said, don't have pickled faces, because it makes absolutely no sense. You can write in the sentence, he said, not to have faces like pickled peppers, because I think he actually used the term pepperoni sottaceti. But even then it doesn't give the idea, so you then have to write in parentheses, sour faces, sour puss.
Despite what may be lost in translation, these homilies shed an enormous and intimate light on Francis and the things he's most concerned about as a pastor. Things like the practice of mercy, personal conversion, and discipleship.
Noi sacerdoti abbiamo tanti limiti. Siamo peccatori, tutti. Ma se andiamo da Gesù Cristo, se cerchiamo il Signore nella preghiera, la preghiera di intercessione, la preghiera di adorazione, siamo buoni sacerdoti.
And they also embody the new Pope's way of communicating. He not only makes himself available to people, he also speaks in language they understand. It's a new kind of accessibility that has put a lot of pressure on the Vatican press office.
It is true that it is difficult to know before what he has the intention to do. And then in this sense, I have to be very attentive.
Before Francis, there was more predictability, but that didn't always translate into good public relations.
In the latter years of John Paul II's pontificate, and also throughout Pope Benedict's pontificate, there was not a good relationship with the media and with the journalists covering the Vatican. And as crises emerged in the Vatican, The Vatican bureaucracy started to circle the wagons, became very defensive. It became a very antagonistic relationship with the media.
One of the best instruments to help us to evangelize the world is the media. And what have we done for a long period of time in the church relationships with media? We've been deathly afraid of these terrible, wicked, wretched people who are in the media out to get us.
Father Thomas Rosica runs Salt and Light Catholic Media Foundation in Canada. When Pope Benedict announced his resignation, he was called to Rome by Father Lombardi to work with the English media on behalf of the Holy See Press Office.
I'm pretty sure it's 144. And the strategy was simply this: let's use this as a teaching moment. Our position was not to be defensive, but it was to be truthful, doing the truth in charity, which is at the heart of authentic journalism. And I remember countless secular journalists from the major networks of the world coming to us afterwards and thanking us for dealing with the questions honestly.
I like to call it the feeding of the 5,000. I mean, you had these sort of like starving journalists who also came there not expecting much. They were expecting this kind of defensive, wagon-circled kind of Vatican, but it wasn't that way at all. There was a real effort to be as open and transparent as possible, and it really started to reverse this vicious cycle. What it had been a downward cycle began to rebuild, I think, this relationship with the media.
And the Vatican didn't stop there. They asked Father Rosica to continue his work with the English language media. It all happens very quietly behind the scenes through an email bulletin every morning containing news and official statements from the Vatican, all translated into English.
And that relationship started off with the heads of the English language media present in Rome. It has now expanded over the past year to many of the heads of English language media, reporters, journalists from around the world. I've noticed a significant shift in approach, in tone, in reception, and in acknowledgement of what we're doing. And for the cynics and the critics and the skeptics who are saying, oh, this is the honeymoon period, they're really not sincere, they're really on the surface, I beg to differ with them and say, no. Pope Francis has done something which his predecessors have been unable to do.
Father Rosica, I wonder, has Pope Francis called his predecessor, Pope Benedict?
Just after the election, there was a phone call between the two of them, and I think...
You can call Father Rosica, and he'll pick up the phone and talk to us and help us understand things and get the Vatican's message out there. And this is so important, I think, at this moment in time, because we have a Pope now that is definitely trying to get a different message across to the world.
The Vatican has been forced to make the necessary adjustments in order to keep pace with Francis. The old maxim that in the Vatican you never speak without a prepared text is definitely not applicable to this Pope. He speaks plainly, he speaks often, and what is most challenging to the old system, he speaks without warning. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. At the end of his first international voyage, a week-long celebration with young Catholics known as World Youth Day, the Pope boarded a plane back to Rome. When it reached cruising altitude, he got up, walked to the back of the plane, and gave an 80-minute interview to the journalists on board. Among the topics discussed were the Vatican Bank, women in the Church, resistance to reform inside the Curia, and the infamous gay lobby in the Vatican, at which point the Pope said, if someone is gay and is searching for the Lord and has goodwill, then who am I to judge him? By the time the plane landed in Rome, shockwaves from that statement had been felt around the world. Why do you think that particular line has just absolutely taken off?
Because it's simple. It's a phrase, it's 5 words, it's plain language, it's something everyone can understand, and it does have ramifications beyond the particular incident he was talking about.
Debates have raged over the Church's teaching on homosexuality as it is set out in the official catechism. Specifically, the condemnation of homosexual acts as intrinsically disordered. Many have misinterpreted this language as applying to homosexual orientation in general. Interestingly, Pope Francis referenced the Catechism immediately after his "Who am I to judge" statement. But he highlighted the lesser-known phrase, which states that homosexual persons must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, and that every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. For Allison Smith and many others, this shift in emphasis drastically changes the conversation.
This is not somebody who is, weighed down by the theology and the sort of academic view of the church. This is a guy who's saying, this is what I believe. And, it's straight. And I think it does have influence beyond just the notion of homosexuality. I think it's a message of inclusion that is at the core, I think, of what the church wants to represent, but hasn't been able to for whatever reason.
2 months later, the Pope dropped another bomb. This time, a 12,000-word interview with fellow Jesuit Father Antonio Spadaro. Extremely candid and highly personal, the interview was simultaneously published by Jesuit journals around the world on September 19th. In North America, the task fell to Father Matt Malone and his team at America Magazine.
We thought if we collaborated, there was probably a better chance of actually of getting the interview, even though it seemed rather far-fetched because nothing like this had ever been done before.
The idea came shortly after Francis was elected, when editor-at-large, Father James Martin, pitched it to Father Malone, who then communicated with Father Spadaro. They compiled a series of questions and collectively approached sources close to the Pope. Francis immediately accepted.
The interview took a very different direction than we expected it to. It was the Pope who personalized the interview. He really saw the opportunity posed by the interview better than we did, right? And the opportunity being for the Pope to speak directly to the people in the pews in a language that they can understand.
We had sent it out to 5 places, CNN, Associated Press, the New York Times, Catholic News Service, and the Wall Street Journal. And they were all allowed to release it at 11 o'clock on the day of its release. And they were right there at, 11:00:00. The New York Times, had it out.
The Times article was the first to go viral, partly because it highlighted one very specific section of the interview.
His comment that we've been obsessing about too few things, that we've been obsessing about contraception, abortion, and gay marriage was a real shock to people, because I think a lot of people felt the church had been focusing on those things. But to hear a Pope say it so bluntly and so candidly was a real shock to people.
But it wasn't the only shocking revelation. For Catholics and those who understand the church, the interview was a glimpse into the mind and heart of Francis. "I am a sinner," he said. "This is the most accurate description." His favorite image of the church is the people of God. And he said that thinking with the church does not mean thinking with the hierarchy. He admitted that it was his authoritarian way of making decisions that had caused problems in his past ministry, and that now he wants real, not ceremonial consultation. The first reform in the church, he said, must be to an attitude of mercy, and to priests, the confessional is not a torture chamber. On women, he said, the feminine genius is needed wherever we make important decisions. And he even confessed that as much as he loves Eucharistic adoration, he often gets distracted or even falls asleep while praying.
I was shocked. I had never read a papal document that had caused me to laugh, that was funny, that caused me to cry, right? That was poignant. And yet this was both of those things, meaning it was profoundly human. And I think that was really its eloquence, was just the humanness of it, the authenticity of it.
Though Francis is not the first pope to give interviews, none of his predecessors gave as many as often. The other innovation here is that his interviews are not filtered through the curia. The question that has to be asked is this: what does all this open, honest, personal, and sometimes critical language mean for the institutional church? Just how much real weight do his unofficial words officially carry? The most authoritative teaching document that Francis has released is an encyclical letter called The Light of Faith, but it was primarily the work of Pope Benedict, who resigned before it could be released. In other words, the world would have to wait for a Francis document. In the summer of 2013, Francis met with members of the Synod office in the Vatican. It organizes international meetings of bishops every few years to discuss a pertinent topic with the Pope. The October 2012 Synod had discussed the new evangelization, and by June, the Synod office had drafted a concluding document called an Apostolic Exhortation.
The practice for years has been that the Pope would base his apostolic exhortation on the deliberations that had taken place in the Synod. In this case, Pope Francis didn't do that. He said, thank you very much, I'm just going to write my own document.
Evangelii Gaudium, or The Joy of the Gospel, is Pope Francis's manifesto, a lengthy document outlining his dream for the Catholic Church.
It certainly has a different style than anything I've seen from papal pens before. I think some of it is extraordinarily beautiful.
That's an important observation. By publishing it as an apostolic exhortation, the vision and the style of Francis have now officially become part of the Church's magisterium.
I think a lot of these themes came out in the interview aboard the plane back from World Youth Day, and people said, oh, those were just off the cuff, we can't pay attention to that. Well, then it comes out in the interview in the Jesuit magazines, and people say, well, that's just an interview, we can't pay attention to that. And then it comes out in Evangelii Gaudium, and people have to take it seriously then. So you can see these themes being developed in a sense, and I think that he's pushing it further and further and further.
What we're reading in that document is simply this Holy Father putting down on paper what he's been showing us, what he has been doing since his election as Pope.
The document is highly accessible and reveals a keen sense of current global and local realities. It's both challenging and hopeful, and full of surprises. In other words, it's typical Francis. In it, the Pope proposes a fundamental transformation of the Catholic Church from an attitude of self-preservation to one of missionary outreach.
The core of the message, and I think it's the core of his whole ministry, is God loves us. None of us can make our way through life without realizing we're loved. We're loved by God, and that love embraces us. It embraces sinners. He says, I'm a sinner. We're all sinners. He's saying to us, we're loved. Now share the love.
Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who now sits on the powerful congregation that makes bishops, has been inspired by the Pope's strong pastoral sense, something he thinks is desperately needed in the Church today, and something, he says, the bishops stressed at the new evangelization synod.
It's almost as if he comes out of the synod on the new evangelization, as if he's the product of that synod in how he presents the gospel, how he recognizes at the heart of the gospel, at the heart of the Church's mission is the kerygma, that you begin by smiling and telling people it's joyful good news. We all need good theology, and we all need good leadership, and the Church provides that. But what it needs is also the pastor who looks a lot like the Good Shepherd, who looks a lot like Jesus.
If Evangelii Gaudium is a dream, the content reveals that Francis has every intention of making it a reality. And that doesn't just affect the church, but also the social, political, and economic structures of the world. No part of the exhortation drew more attention and stirred more debate than the Pope's scathing critique of the global capitalist economy. In paragraph 54, he wrote that some people continue to defend trickle-down theories which assume that economic growth, encouraged by a free market, will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world. This, according to Francis, has never been confirmed by the facts. And concerning the growing disparity between the rich and the poor, he wrote, "This imbalance is the result of ideologies which defend the absolute autonomy of the marketplace and financial speculation, and thus reject the right of states to exercise any form of control."
I think that his economics message, it's just so hard to dismiss it because the facts are just so real.
Charles Clark is an economist and advisor to the Holy See mission to the United Nations. He applauds Francis for pushing an evidence-based critique of the global economic reality.
He's not proposing, well, this theory of what determines full employment is wrong and I have a new theory. He's pointing out that there are tens of millions of people who are being excluded, and the ideology behind those who don't want to change is that, well, markets will take care of it. Well, if markets took care of it, there'd be full employment. And the Pope wouldn't have to go around saying, well, we have people who are being excluded, because they would be included.
There are people, some people in the Catholic Church itself, who would say we don't need to pay any attention or a lot of attention to what the Pope is saying about the current economic situation because he's not an economist.
Well, the critique is backed up by some of the top economists. And this argument, well, he doesn't understand the economy. Well, most of the people who are critiquing him aren't economists and don't understand it, but a lot of economists don't understand it. I mean, there were only a handful who...
Why not? If you're an economist and you don't understand what Pope Francis is saying, what's the wall that's in front of you?
Well, the wall is that to train an economist, you develop one aspect of their knowledge, which is this theoretical model, to the exclusion of how that fits the real world.
Would you call it an ideology? Is this?
It's a pure ideology. Well, actually, it's beyond that. It is a faith. It is a dogma, which, if we had Catholics as devoted to the dogma teachings of the Church as economists are to the dogma of general equilibrium theory, we would be a real force.
That unwavering faith in theoretical economic models has spawned, according to Pope Francis, a globalization of indifference where money rules and human beings, especially the poor, are disposable. Paragraph 202 of the exhortation reads, "As long as the problems of the poor are not radically resolved by rejecting the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation, and by attacking the structural causes of inequality, no solution will be found for the world's problems, or for that matter, to any problems."
He wants us not just to redistribute wealth. I think he wants to redefine wealth, to see wealth are these gifts that the Creator has given us, and they are gifts to everyone. And everyone has a right and a duty to be part of that process.
Nell'elezione io avevo accanto a me il arcivescovo emerito di San Paolo e anche prefetto emerito della Congregazione per il Clero, il Cardinale Claudio Umes, un grande amico, un grande amico. Quando una cosa veniva un po' pericolosa, lui mi confortava, no? E quando i voti sono saliti ai 2/3, diviene l'applauso consueto perché è stato eletto il Papa. E lui mi abbracciò, mi baciò e mi ha detto: non ti dimentichi dei poveri. E quella parola è entrata qui. I poveri, i poveri. Ah, come vorrei una chiesa povera. E per i poveri.
The Church has always been an advocate for the poor, but for Francis, the connection is personal. It's what took him to the tiny island of Lampedusa, the gateway to Europe for thousands of African refugees fleeing poverty, war, and persecution each year. Many of the decrepit boats capsize before landing. Instead of being a means of hope, the Pope said, these boats are a means of death.
Quando alcune settimane fa ho appreso questa notizia, che purtroppo tante volte si è ripetuta, il pensiero vi è tornato continuamente come una spina nel cuore che porta sofferenza.
For people like Dr. Philip Berger, the Pope's message comes across loud and clear. He's co-founder of Canadian Doctors for Refugee Care.
A globalization of indifference. Do you agree with Pope Francis?
Of course I agree. It's showing the rest of the world that refugees are not subhuman entities that we can just ignore, that we could become inured to their pain and their suffering. He also knows that refugees traditionally and historically have been the least powerful, the most disenfranchised groups of individuals who have no rights. They're stateless. They have no rights anywhere. And they're putting themselves at great risk to flee terrible situations.
The trip to Lampedusa was a gesture of solidarity, but, says Dr. Berger, by drawing attention to the global refugee crisis, Francis also challenged a new xenophobia developing in the richer countries.
He has brought that debate fully to the surface. It's a duty of the receiving country to take care of them, to welcome them, to make sure they're safe, and not to use them as scapegoats for all the problems in the countries to which the refugees flee.
This is a worldwide issue. We must be attentive to this. It's part of our mission as Christians.
As Archbishop of Toronto, one of the most diverse cities in the world, Cardinal Collins has been a strong advocate for refugees.
In our whole spiritual tradition, the first refugees is Jesus, Mary, and Joseph fleeing to Egypt from the threat of death. And that image of the Holy Family, refugees, this is what should inspire, I think, all of our parishioners, and it does.
I can tell you that it makes it easier for many Catholic physicians and others like myself who's Jewish to get out there in the streets, to confront the government about its policies. And look, here we have Pope Francis, world leader, asking for the very same thing that ordinary physicians and medical students and nursing students have been asking for nearly 2 years in Canada. Treat them like human beings. They are human beings.
Monsignor John Kozar is no stranger to the refugee crisis. He heads the Catholic Near East Welfare Association that supports local Christian communities often displaced by political, religious, and ethnic conflicts.
What we seek for the Christians in the Middle East is just to guarantee them what are their basic rights to be good human beings, good citizens of this area. These are their homelands. And they've been there longer than other groups. And I think in this area where there is horrible conflict, and some people in the West, they're tired of hearing it. They turn off the news. I'm sick of that. I'm sick of that. He's saying, don't ever be sick of it.
It's hard not to be sick of the civil war ravaging Syria. The Pope responded in early September as the United States threatened to attack the Syrian regime after it used chemical weapons on its own people. Francis called for a worldwide day of prayer and fasting and wrote an open letter to Vladimir Putin and the G20 leaders gathered in St. Petersburg. "I make a heartfelt appeal to all the leaders present," he wrote, "to help find ways to overcome the conflicting positions and to lay aside the futile pursuit of a military solution."
Look how he inspired us to get off of our comfortable seats and leave the television set and get on our knees and pray, fast and pray for what was imminent with an incursion into Syria. That jolted a lot of people. I think it jolted a lot of political leaders too.
A few days later, the US and Russia, Syria's most powerful ally, agreed to a plan to rid the country of its chemical weapons and facilities. The US military strike was deterred.
I just recently met a bishop from Syria, and he said the Christian population in my suffering country and the Muslims, he said, I repeat, and the Muslims, are beseeching me in the strongest way possible, implore the Holy Father to kindly please get involved with this whole quest for peace in this part of the world. He is the only moral figure that can command enough respect that possibly might bring some peace.
He becomes a beacon, really. He becomes a standard by which others can judge their own actions. When you have that stance of wanting to listen to opposing views and find places where dialogue can occur, that is the antidote to so much of what poisons politics in the world today. It's exactly what the world needs.
By whatever power you believe Pope Francis wound up on the chair of St. Peter, he embodies a message that seems particularly relevant for this moment in human history. It's becoming apparent, in other words, that this is a pope not only for the Catholic Church, but also for the whole world. Still, the most pressing question for the new pope has been an internal one: how to clean up the mess in the Vatican bureaucracy.
Before the conclave, there were suggestions that there should be a commission of cardinals around the world to have access, direct access to the Pope in order to give him information that many times did not come.
The Council of Cardinals, which has been called the C8 or the G8, is an important institution. We have cardinals that represent basically the world. Now, the Pope has been meeting with them, what is for a Pope, very frequently. And it's very clear that in this relatively informal atmosphere of sitting around a table, things can get said and done at a much faster rate than was possible before.
Cardinal O'Malley represents North America on that council.
The Holy Father is anxious to internationalize the central government of the Church and really put the Curia at the service of the dioceses and of the universal Church. And I think that that's a great cultural change.
How so? I asked Father Ruzicka, who has regular dealings with the Vatican.
It's a cultural change because Pope Francis is Italian, but he's not Italian. He's from the third world, but he knows very well all of the games of the world in Rome. And I think it's his profound wisdom, it's his ability to consult, but most especially his lack of fear, which is causing the greatest cultural change. Francis is not afraid of anything.
He wants to make the Church more collegial, and it's interesting to watch him sort of move towards a decision. He's not overwhelmed by getting all kinds of advice and sometimes contradictory. He's quite capable of making a decision.
He certainly is. Take, for instance, the scandal-ridden Vatican Bank. In his first year in office, Francis created a commission to report directly to him on its activities and practices. He then overhauled the group of cardinals overseeing the bank, who just 11 months prior had been appointed to 5-year terms by Pope Benedict. He also created a new secretariat to oversee all Vatican finances. To run it, Francis tapped Australian Cardinal George Pell, an outspoken critic of the Vatican's missteps, and perhaps more importantly, an Anglo-Saxon with no time for Italian wheeling and dealing. The Pope also stressed the importance of having lay experts involved from around the world. Cardinal Collins is one of the new appointments to the commission overseeing the Vatican Bank.
We just need to be sure there's transparency, there's accountability, all these things which have been so much emphasized by Pope Benedict in his reforms. Pope Francis is continuing, but also perhaps beyond that, a reorganizing to make it more effective. There's always a danger in an organization of having these silos where people doing good work, but really not properly communicating.
In an interview with the Boston Globe shortly after his appointment, Cardinal Pell said he expects to save millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, by implementing rational accounting measures. When it comes to reforms, he said, Pope Francis is very different. Not only does he mean it, but he has the capacity to get it done.
See, judge, and act. And then he moves on to the next thing. He takes a look, consults around, he prays about it, thinks about it, gets a lot of advice, and then decides.
That's good news when the topic turns to the worst scandal of all, sexual abuse. Nothing has been more damaging to the Church's image or credibility than the abuse of minors by clergymen and the subsequent cover-up by bishops and the Vatican. Cardinal O'Malley has perhaps the best track record in dealing with the issue on the ground, having resurrected the Archdiocese of Boston in the aftermath of the 2002 crisis. So, when Francis created a new commission to advise him on the matter, he turned to the Cardinal.
One of the big challenges that we face is to make sure that all of the bishops' conferences throughout the world have policies in place that will assure child protection and be able to respond when problems arise. If you don't have good policies in place, you're going to improvise. And when you improvise, you make many mistakes, and many people are hurt, and the Church is hurt.
Policy or no policy, people want to know what happens to bishops who failed to inform the proper authorities about abusive priests in their diocese.
We've all told the stories of sexual abuse and cover-up.
The response of many journalists like Alison Smith is, we're still waiting.
I don't think we've seen yet the impact of the decisions that some of which he's made, some of which he obviously has to make, about how the Church is actually going to handle this. Appears to be this kind of collusion around protecting people, I think, for most people, is as offensive as the crime itself. And you don't get past that in a short period of time.
Still, Francis has consulted widely and moved relatively quickly on reform. Consider, too, that he hasn't been in office that long. He's also been extremely critical of attitudes, especially among priests and bishops, that he says hurt the Church's mission. The "who am I to judge" comment wasn't the only one to turn heads during his visit to Rio de Janeiro. Away from Copacabana Beach and the millions of people who came to celebrate with him, Pope Francis met privately with the bishops of Brazil and the leaders of the Latin American bishops' conferences. He told them about his vision for the Church, and he criticized the attitudes that prevent it from being realized. First, making the gospel message an ideology. Second, functionalism, which turns the Church into an NGO and leaves no room for mystery. And third, clericalism, which rejects the proper role of lay people in the Church. Remarkably, the Pope's message was nothing new to the men in the room. The talks were inspired by a 2007 meeting of the Latin American bishops at the shrine of Our Lady of Aparecida. There, in a spirit of prayer, they charted a daring path for the future of the continent by promoting discipleship and mission.
The document of Aparecida is, in great part, his brainchild. I mean, the Holy Father is very, very capable and intellectually very, very sharp.
In other words, don't mistake a simple piety for foolishness. The first stop on his trip to Brazil as Pope? That Marian shrine in Aparecida.
The consequences of all of this are extraordinary. Essentially, the Pope declared that he's adopted the vision and the pastoral strategy of Aparecida for the whole Church. And there's more. When he addressed the bishops, Francis made very pointed statements about the kind of bishops he wants. For example, pastors who don't think and act like princes. Given the scope of his other comments, it's hard to believe he was speaking just to the men in the room.
What is the proper role of the papacy in terms of the church? Is the Pope to be the model of the way every bishop operates? Or is he the Bishop of Rome who intervenes when it's necessary to guarantee the unity of the church?
Well, both, apparently. While promoting a decentralization of authority, Francis has used every opportunity to tell his bishops exactly what he expects of them. Take, for instance, his remarks to the nuncios, or papal ambassadors who nominate priests to become bishops. Do not give in to spiritual worldliness, he said, acting for your own fulfillment. We are pastors, and we need pastors who are gentle, patient, and merciful, who love poverty, who aren't ambitious. Or read his address to the Vatican congregation that makes bishops. Renouncement and sacrifice are inherent to the office of bishop, he said. Be sure that candidates are married to their church without constantly seeking another. This is called adultery. Or read the short letter to his new cardinals. This is not a promotion, an honor, nor a decoration, he wrote. I ask you please to receive this appointment with a simple and humble heart.
I'd have to be honest and say I think there are some nervous people because the old model of governance and presence and so forth is very much being challenged.
There is a common refrain, as Francis likes to say, bishops and priests must be shepherds with the smell of the sheep. A potent message coming from a man who practices what he preaches.
And I think it's very clear that he wants the priests, and he encourages all of us to be involved intimately, not only in the life of our people, but in the life of our poor people. I think he personally has embodied a lot of simplicity in terms of the liturgical life of the church and the way he lives personally in Rome. But I think he would join me in saying we don't want Francis priests, we want priests of Jesus Christ.
We know that ordination is no guarantee of holiness. And Pope Francis is challenging a lot of people that ordination is not the end of it.
I don't know about you, but sometimes my own thoughts hold me hostage.
Josephine Lombardi is a professor at St. Augustine's Seminary in Toronto. Francis, she says, wants to make sure his priests and bishops don't become a roadblock for people who are searching.
God is counting on them to facilitate an encounter with Christ, right? To be a sneak preview of Christ, to woo people to Christ. And if all they see is the critical side, the demanding side, and not the attractive, loving, merciful side of Christ, then we're in trouble.
Clericalism has caused a lot of damage in the church, and the Holy Father is very aware of that.
And he's aware of the other side of that coin, namely the clericalism of lay people. If you're a lay person in the church, says Cardinal O'Malley, you have to acknowledge your unique role.
When people become involved in the parish, we give them all these liturgical things to do, and then they feel, well, I'm really participating in the life of the church. The important role that lay people have is to transform society. So I think the Holy Father is going to stress very much these other aspects of lay ministry in the church.
One of the ways Pope Francis is promoting the laity is by consulting them. In October of 2013, he announced a synod of bishops to discuss today's pastoral challenges to family life. With the announcement came a questionnaire that the bishops were to share immediately as widely as possible. The questions were surprisingly concrete. How is the Church's teachings on the value of the family understood by people today? What percentage of people are divorced and remarried? What questions do they have of the Church? What is the attitude towards civil unions for persons of the same sex? In the past, the Synod of Bishops has been critiqued by bishops as being out of touch with the Church on the ground. That seems destined to change.
Pope Francis has gone back and seized this very important instrument, the Synod of Bishops, and he wants to use it properly as a consultative group, not as any kind of legislative group, but as a true listening board to reflect the needs of the Church and to discuss things openly.
How do you think the people on the ground who received the survey and had the opportunity to give feedback feel about this consultation?
I think they're very excited. I know in my own diocese that all parishes were consulted and people were given an opportunity to give their input. And I think they're just overjoyed that we are the body of Christ. All of us make up the body of Christ, and that our gifts and our life experience have now been consulted.
Philadelphia is hosting the 2015 World Meeting of Families that the Archbishop says will feed off the work of the Synod. He put the survey online and instructed his priests to consult the people. But there was a major drawback.
We did the best we could, but we only had about a 6 weeks time frame in order to get it accomplished.
What kind of response did you get?
We had less than 800 responses in a diocese of 1.5 million people.
What do you think that means? What does that say?
Well, I think it's hardly enough time to actually do a very serious job of collecting that material.
The hope is that the logistical problems with this kind of mass consultation can be ironed out over time, and most are willing to endure a few bumps on the trail that Francis is blazing. There is a very real expectation that this Pope will give a greater voice to lay people, and that can't be separated from the question of women in the Church. Professor Lombardi says the Pope's call for a profound theology of women will affirm their unique gifts.
I think the hope is to be consulted and to be included in decision-making. So can we tap into some of the gifts that lay women have and empower them to be leaders in the Church? Can we trust them and know that they may know what families need and the needs of other lay people in the various sectors, and then count on them to inform practice and teaching?
The Church would come to a grinding halt without the women doing the work that they do. I'm sure that we will see women taking on more highly visible roles in the Church.
A decentralization of authority, a call for greater synodality and collegiality, promoting bishops who are pastors, condemning ideologies, eradicating clericalism, promoting lay participation and consultation, a promise to involve women in decision-making. What are we to make of all this?
I look at him as a pope of the Second Vatican Council, really.
Well, I mean...
Father John O'Malley is a distinguished church historian and an expert on the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s.
The paradox is that Francis is the first pope in 50 years not to have participated in the council. But for me, that's a kind of advantage.
An advantage, he says, because it frees Francis from the internal battles over what the council actually said and did. But understand the council, Father O'Malley says, and you'll understand Pope Francis.
The key is in Pope John the 23rd's address to the council the day the council opened, October the 11th, 1962, in which he tried to give the council, and did give the council, a direction. He wanted the council to show the Church to be the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness. And as part of that, he indicated a sort of a change of style of councils, that they were not to issue condemnations, but to be much more positive and affirmative in what they decided. And the council took that up. And if you look at the council in a broad sense, it's a council of outreach and reconciliation.
It seemed to be an astonishing event. And part of it was the embodiment of in the Pope, and I do see this arc, one to now. And some of it was what you could see in the eyes, in the consoling eyes of these two popes.
So, historically speaking, Pope Francis didn't just appear from nowhere. And interestingly enough, people today are saying the same thing about Francis as they say about the 50-year-old council.
The substance is the same, there's a great continuity there, but it's the style, the way that which the message is being communicated is different. Do you agree with that?
Well, people say, well, it's just style, but I say style is substance. It's the most important part of any person, any institution. So you ask the question, how is the church? And the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness is one how. A moral taskmaster is another how.
And those are the questions that Pope Francis is asking. How to be a pope, how to be a Christian, how to be a Catholic. And those things are as important as any doctrinal formulation that we've developed over the past centuries. That's how Jesus dealt with people.
Cardinal Wuerl agrees.
It's true. He's passing on the teaching. He has to. It's the teaching of Jesus. What he's saying is what Jesus taught us. It's been passed on in the church for 20 centuries. But now, in these days of the new Pentecost, he's saying, here's how you do it.
Do you think it's possible that the changes that Francis is implementing can be reversed?
Anything can be reversed. But there is a tremendous now momentum behind Francis. And I think if something should happen to him, the cardinals who would be called upon to elect his successor would be under tremendous pressure to elect someone who would more or less carry this momentum forward.
I can't imagine, going back to some of the old ways of doing things.
There's no doubt the vast majority of people, both Catholics and non-Catholics, love the style of Pope Francis and how he's exercising his ministry. But not everybody has gotten on board. There is a grumbling that can be heard from a small minority at all levels of the Catholic Church, not over what Francis is doing, but over what they say he's undoing.
Some are challenged by the simplicity issue, and others are anxious that he isn't as strong on issues like the meaning of marriage and abortion as his predecessors are perceived to be. I don't think that's true, actually, but people make those comments.
It seems to be because he wants to put evangelization before catechesis, and this causes a lot of anxiety in quarters where people are worried that somehow the church's teachings will be misrepresented.
Francis hasn't changed a single doctrine or official teaching of the Catholic Church, but he's chosen not to prioritize its moral teachings. The fear is that this strategy will lead to a moral relativism where people are free to do as they please, so long as they try to live a good life. Francis argues the opposite. If the Church's moral teachings are emphasized over and above the gospel invitation to encounter a loving God, he says the moral teachings themselves risk becoming a house of cards.
He said some things which are not popular, which haven't been appreciated by some people in the United States, some political leaders in the United States, some pundits in the United States.
Catholics in the United States.
Catholics in the United States, conservatives in the United States, certainly liberals in the United States. I mean, it would be silly to kind of pretend he has won over everybody, but being upset is an okay thing. I think upsetting things from time to time is good. I mean, it's not a change of doctrine, but it is a change of emphasis, and it is a huge change.
If some have misunderstood him and misinterpreted him, then they're not going to support him. If they see him as someone who's threatening and is changing too much, and then people who are comfortable with their position, then they may come out swinging. You need humility. I think you need to be humble and open.
What word of advice would you offer to those people to, give them some sense of peace?
Well, I think we have to trust in God's providence for the church. This is a very good man, and I think that the joy that people feel because of his ministry is something that should be a consolation to those who have their concerns.
What is it that Jesus came to say to us? He came to say the kingdom of God is at hand. God is with you now. Your sins are forgiven. I'm here to give you new life in the Holy Spirit. Sounds to me like what Francis is saying. Don't evaluate Pope Francis against our norms. Evaluate him against the norm in the New Testament, Jesus.
For an institution that measures change in centuries, a lot has happened in a very short period of time.
It is like throwing the doors to St. Peter's wide open, and the sunshine's coming in and the wind is blowing through, and the Pope is listening to what everybody has to say.
Undaunted by neither the weight of tradition nor the challenges before him, Pope Francis pushes forward, witnessing through words and, more importantly, through actions, to the gospel of mercy and love. But the responsibility is not his to bear alone.
What has to happen now is that the church has to somehow build on that credibility. It's sort of like he's the headline, but the meat of the story is what happens in the broader reaches of the church.
At the end of the day, the Catholic Church lives and dies on the ground, at the grassroots, in the parishes and in the pews.
Pope Benedict XVI once wrote that being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. In his own simple and humble way, Pope Francis is helping to facilitate that encounter. And in that sense, the Francis effect is only the beginning.
I don't think it's an accident that the Holy Spirit has chosen this time to break through with something new.
He's giving people an opportunity to know Christ.
After all that we've been through, the arrival of this man and the enthusiasm that he has generated is just extraordinary.
I'm absolutely convinced that Pope Francis is the Pope whom the Spirit gave to the Church today.
What comes of this now? Where does it take everyone? Again, it has opened 1,000 doors. Now, where do we walk through them?
Fratelli e sorelle, vi lascio. Grazie tante dell'accoglienza. Pregate per me e a presto, ci vediamo presto. Domani voglio andare a pregare la Madonna perché custodisca a tutta Roma. Buonanotte e buon riposo.